not having capacity, etc. But also, cities are very different ideologically. And that means often when it comes to how politics has played out, cities have had the least amount of self-determination power. And we think that's where we're going to bring two arguments about why this will mean that cities will likely be very progressive, or at the very least increase the amount of choices people have, but secondly why we think quality of life will be better. Before that, a little bit of setup. How do we think this debate works out? I think this debate works out as it generally does in most places, i.e. in case of tax policy, when national tax is collected, the amount that is given to cities will usually be based on need. So this need will be defined on both infrastructural needs and also the number of people that live in the city. Secondly, one factor that also plays in is the degree of contribution that these cities have in terms of the national tax figure, and we think that also happens in many places already. But thirdly, we also think that cities will also have independent capability to do different things around taxation or innovations of taxation, right? What do I mean by that, right? So for example, cities may sometimes choose to impose additional tax if they really feel like it. Cities may choose to impose additional levies and charges, like which are not necessarily taxes but function in the same way. Cities may choose to give subsidy, which is in effect like reducing taxes, etc. Because under our side, cities have a lot more control over the kinds of policies that they can create. But secondly, we think what's most important, and this is where a lot of the debate happens, is the fact that cities now have control over healthcare policies. If they really want to give out insurance to people, what kind of premiums do they really want? What kind of subsidies are they willing to give out to people? Are they going to be staggered? Like, is there going to be a demographic difference, etc.? Things they cannot decide right now within a national blanket policy. Secondly, things like education in terms of not just districting but also quality of schools, experimental schools, things that cities have often wanted to do but they cannot do because the national education policy doesn't allow them to. Thirdly, things like, do you want to be a sanctuary city or not, right? So this is, for example, where we have seen cities like Austin often being very progressive in states that are supremely conservative, right? Now cities will have the power to decide who they want within those cities, etc. Fourthly, right, cities will also be able to decide to what extent they want to balance different tools of criminal justice system like rehabilitation, penalty, crime, etc. It's a lot more self-determination, and the arguments will demonstrate how that's good. But before I get there, yes?
If national policy is bad, why don't you then simply fix national policy and not create these autonomous cities?
I think that's not the question. The question is, how much control do cities have when it comes to being able to effectively change national politics? And that's where the framework of the debate is really important. More into that in my argument. Firstly, why do we think this is likely to lead to more places that are very progressive and cities, right? Firstly, because cities are places where there's a lot more exposure to cultural exchange. This is really important because unless you are being exposed to people from different culture, you simply can never understand what people from other culture go through and why maybe in many ways you're similar, right? That's why, for example, in cities like New York, even the really poor neighborhoods 20 years ago now are some of the places where there's the most amount of cultural exchange, where people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez get elected in a district simply because there's so much cultural differences and diversity. We think cities will finally able to leverage that entirely in order to be able to make policies. That's a unique way in which cities are progressive. B, also because cities are places where social life is fundamentally different, right? So for example, NYU stands as a landmark, but it's not just New York. Even in places like Kuala Lumpur, University of Malaya and other universities are not just deeply respected and revered, but these are people who have a lot of say over public life. But they don't have a lot of say over national politics because city people are seen as inherently elitist anyway. These are people who get to go and mingle in poetry sessions, university sessions, open hall, and all these other places where they have so much more control over our scenario where cities get to determine their policies. So it means that people who are more progressive simply have more leverage when it comes to cities. But thirdly, the fact that there's more access to education and cities are more willing to try out things like newer technologies and are simply do not have to go through as much bureaucracy compared to the whole country, waiting for the whole country to shift a policy versus just a city deciding it works for them and therefore they make that shift. So cities become a lot more agile. The fourth way in which cities are likely to make more progressive and good choices is simply, and this is really important, changing how voting works, right? Because under our side, there will be parties that will literally be exclusively megacity based. They will cater their policies just for megacities, maybe for one, maybe for two. It doesn't matter. matter because these are people who often live in cities, live the same air, but also want really progressive policies, but they don't see a place for themselves when it comes to national politics. Being a mayor often means you don't have a lot of influence over most of the things that needs to happen. Versus now, where cities see a lot more ability to make these decisions, means that these people are likely to create these unique kinds of parties, create unique community centers, create unique kinds of discussions, simply because they see so much more decision-making power. Because we think people's ability to do things is largely contingent on their perceived ability to get change they want, which is simply very low under their side, where cities are part of overall national politics and don't have a lot of control. But the fifth way in which this happens is where we think just comparatively, cities are demonized often in national politics arena, right? So often they're seen as liberal elitists, right? So this is exactly where a lot of the horrible things that happens in Austin, for example, is because of horrible state policies, but the city itself did not necessarily vote for Trump. Or for example, Kuala Lumpur, that has often been one of the largest critics of all kinds of governments doing all kinds of wrong things, but they don't have a lot of independent legislative power, especially when it comes to the most important areas like social policies or criminal justice policies, because often these cities want to try out more progressive laws, but they simply do not have the mandate to be able to do it. The final argument therefore is about why we think this will lead to a better quality of life. Firstly, because we told you either cities become more conclusive, but in the worst case scenario, and this is the brilliant part about it, people have more choice. It means you can choose to live in the city that is moving towards the ideological direction that you believe in, but more importantly, once you go into that city, you can not just be a participant in politics, but you will have a lot more control over how the future of the city will look like because of your participation. But secondly, cities often want things like progressive laws because safety attracts a lot of investment. Safety attracts a lot of talent, right? So it means that there will be things like more policing, focusing on improvising ghettos, which is not a national priority right now. Cities constantly lose out because their priorities are never the national talking points. But that's where an increasing number of people live. They need to have a thank you.
How I want you to imagine these new megacities are as if these are wallets of larger states. For example, if you're in America, more likely cities like San Francisco and New York are going to be the places in which either A, the federal governments are able to either A, increase taxation and then not even give any forms of return onto money because they are either A, self-sustaining, and number two, redirect those funds to more prioritization into other places, as opposed to a world in which those funds still have to be directed into those megacities, and hence it means some allocations of resources ought to be considered into megacities in opposition's world. I'm going to look at two things in my speech. First, I'm going to illustrate to you clearly the comparative and imagine you the world in which these megacities have autonomous power, whether or not that is better for A, things like, for example, progressivity and the quality of life of individuals within those areas, and I'll explain to you why the areas beyond those cities are more likely going to be also benefited at the end of the day. And number two, I'm also going to look at things that, for example, whether or not we're actually going to make, whether or not things that, for example, national politics are more likely going to be harmed, whether or not megacities are going to undermine other further forms of utility. Before that, right, I think this is a constant that the debate has a consensus that the entire debate has agreed upon. Megacities are more likely progressive. Shita gave you a bunch of reasons. Things like, for example, diversity, things like, for example, these are situations where individuals are more likely educated because they're exposed to things like, for example, access to education and universities, and also oftentimes these universities have abundance of access to more liberal versions or progressive versions of literature and education. In conclusion to that, there is a clear comparative between those megacities as opposed to other places within those areas. The comparative opening opposition have to defend that, given that, is that national policies then affect what happens into megacities. Why is that bad in opening opposition's world? The first, oftentimes megacities already have the push and the political will to drive to make things, for example, progressive laws, be it things, for example, protection against women in corporate worlds, there will be things, for example, more LGBT rights, and so on and so forth. What does it happen in this side of the house is that when more conservative areas or more conservative policies, oftentimes because of things like populism and number two, things like, for example, fear-mongering, that oftentimes the conservatives oftentimes utilize in order for them to garner more support, these cities are unable to push for those progressive policies because now those policies that are not effective whatsoever are now influence onto them. That meant that on a comparative, our megacities have more capacity to become more progressive. Hence, it means the arguments that Shita tell you as to why individuals who choose to want to be living in progressive force are able to opt in into areas where they're more likely going to be progressive. On that comparative alone, there is a comparatively better world at the end of the day. Number two, then they might say, oh, but guys, criminal justice policies more likely are going to be bad. No, thank you. They must prove to you incentives of megacities to even be bad in the very beginning. We gave you reasons that, for example, oftentimes safety and better criminal justice systems, and oftentimes access to justice, be it in terms of the more police and also, like, for example, making it easier for people to report into certain crimes, are more of the incentives of megacities, because safer communities oftentimes either A, attract more people at the end of the day, or two, attract more investors for them, right? I think on that comparative alone, criminal justice systems are still better in our. Thirdly, let's talk about immigration, because opening opposition might say then, oh, but guys, megacities are more likely going to either A, drive out poor people, or number two, drive out different groups and cultures. Here are reasons why that's less likely the case. The first, oftentimes what megacities want is to be more attractive to more investors and more companies to come in and to invest, to ensure that things are enough for the flourishment of those megacities. That meant that they're more likely having the incentive to utilize the current human resources that exist within those megacities. That meant that things like, for example, more educational programs for the poor and more places that are more likely going to be better. In addition, when you think that poor people are going to be drive out, we necessarily think that when they drive out, it's actually bad for megacities. Oftentimes, when they are more likely progressive within those areas, it's also going to be a very unpopular thing for them to drive out individuals who are then poor. In addition, we also say megacities oftentimes benefit from more diversity rather than less. Why is that necessarily true? A homogeneous form of communities within megacities oftentimes drives less economic activity, because oftentimes diversity also adds into things like, for example, more food, more culture. Oftentimes these are economic resources when they open up things like, for example, small shops for people to obtain, cheaper prices for individuals, and these are oftentimes things that megacities often benefit. Therefore, it means on a balance of probabilities, more likely that these megacities are more likely going to be more inclusive as opposed to regressive, as opposed to what they might suggest at the end of the day. Lastly, right, let's defend the worst case scenario. Let's assume they drive out poor people. We say that's a comparatively better world. Why? The first, oftentimes, if you still want these poor people to still be in megacities in this side of the house, even when the megacities are unable to necessarily afford or even cater to them, the lives of the poor individuals are more likely going to be worse. Things like, for example, cost of living, things like, for example, housing are more likely expensive. So even if when cities are, like later, for example, they are forced to drive out because they are unable to have the capacity to, like, for example, cater to them, we say on that comparative, it's more likely better at the end of the day. Lastly, right, let's look at national politics. They say, guys, if you don't have any form of influence onto national policies, they are not necessarily going to care about megacities. The first, they never give you any reason why that's necessarily important, given that oftentimes the quality of life of individuals within megacities are already better. Number two, we say if you deprioritize, in our worst case scenario, if you deprioritize megacities, that meant that you are able to channel the taxation, that you are able to tax upon the companies and incomes of people within megacities and not give them any sense because they are self-sustaining, and then channel those resources into other areas here, on a net, more money into other areas and other states and other rural areas. On that comparative, you save up more resources if you do this closing.
Do you think it's realistic to assume that an entire megacity can function without a working class?
Number one, oftentimes a megacity has an incentive to ensure A, a stronger working class, and number two, a stronger middle class, because oftentimes when investors and companies want to enter and tap into a market, they look at middle classes, whether or not middle classes are strong, because these are the groups that oftentimes A, are in abundance, but number two, can afford their products. So it is self-suicide if these megacities do not want to create a good working class and a good middle class. That is an assumption that need to prove on a comparative. Lastly, right, they might say, but guys, making this means that megacities are going to perpetuate inequality. The first, oftentimes inequality is actually bad for megacities. A, because oftentimes inequality is attached to stigmas like these are places which are unsafe. That meant that there's internal incentives for either A, corporations to improve infrastructure by doing things, for example, CSRs within those areas, or number two, megacities to use the current taxation or the current resources that are given by national funding in order for them to improve areas. Moreover, we say that middle incomes are oftentimes stronger at the end of the day within those areas for the aforementioned reasons that I gave you. Lastly, right, we say that states beyond have more control, like states beyond like megacities are more likely better, because it means more likely the savings and the resources are more on a net. Speaker, What you need to evaluate in this debate is whether or not areas within those places beyond megacities might have extra additional resources that we might provide to you, and the internal incentives within megacities to ensure the quality of life is better. Do not let anti-progressive movements to influence the progressive policies that would have been created in our, when national policies influence megacities. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
I think to speak to those remarks and Banti, that's...
So what do we hear out of this? We hear this broad idea that cities will become disengaged with national politics and this change national politics in a way that are bad for everyone. A few responses. First, on the idea about progressivism. So the reality is that as it stands right now, in some cases, megacities are dominated politically by rural areas. For example, the election of Trump, and in some cases, megacities dominate a country in such a way that they control the majority of politics, for example, in South Korea. Whichever case this is, though, it's going to remain this way, right? Population changes aren't going to be dramatic. Even if we find some immigration changes happen, these aren't going to come into effect for voting until citizenship comes 20 or 30 years down the road. The reality is, in at least the short to medium term, population is going to be the way they are right now. So if it is the case that cities and countries have different political views, they're going to still espouse these different political views on the national scale. We don't think it's likely that cities suddenly stop being progressive nationally when they become even more progressive locally. We think instead the case is likely to be that as cities become more progressive within their own sort of smaller areas, they export that and have stronger feelings about that towards the national level. We get a specific mechanism out of OO that, well, they stop caring about the country because the country no longer shares their values. What we tell you, though, is that because national governments retain taxation power, because national governments, in other words, retain the ability to tell the cities what they are and are not able to fund, that participation in national politics remains entirely necessary for these places, right? Because they need to vote in national elections in order to get the funding that they want to institute the sort of programs they want to institute in their cities. So we don't think it is the case that disengagement at the national level happens. We don't think the national political level is frankly all that important in this debate, because the people are going to continue voting the same way they already have. Sure, why not?
Why does that matter if OG modeled it as states get money proportionate to their need? If cities get money proportionate to their need?
So presumably, if I have 40% of the need, I get 40% of the pot, and if the pot is bigger, I get a bigger 40%. Cool. The other thing we hear is that immigration to cities is bad and cities become overcrowded. The answer is that's more of a problem with the status quo, because in the status quo, cities cannot decide who comes into them and who does not. In the gov world, cities can decide these sorts of things. So if we why these harms exist of overcrowding things, the answer is let's find a mechanism to deal with that, which is what we do here. So, in the extension, first a principle thing about how this is broadly a more democratic thing to do. I think the reality is that different values exist, sure, but also different problems exist. We think it ought to be the case that people have the best ability to solve their own problems that they can, and should be able to determine what the best solution is for this. The reality is that countries today are massive, right? The US has 330 million people in it. India has over 1 billion. These are not democracies that function perfectly on an individual scale. We think that subdividing these into smaller and smaller units allows for more action, for these problems to be solved better. It's not this question a question of whether certain political views are good or bad, but rather that people should have the right to express their political views over their own small communities. We think achieve that better in our side of the house. We think this leads to more individual autonomy, as people are better able to decide the rules that govern their lives. People are better able to decide what their standard is that they live under, what they can and cannot do, these sorts of things. We think autonomy is important for primary motivation for two reasons. We think, compared to utilitarianism, autonomy is the underlying facet of determining some utility, of determining a good for the world, and why is that? Two reasons. First, utilitarianism relies on the idea that people can make choices, i.e. that one thing is more utile than another thing, because the ability to choose between these things exists. If this is no longer the case, people no longer have choices, then it no longer makes sense to determine how good a situation is, because that's the only situation that can possibly exist. In other words, determining a value of a state of the world relies on there being an alternative state of the world that can exist, rather than the ability to choose between states of the world. Secondly, the ability to have preferences between worlds, i.e. the ability to say this world is preferable to that world determines on somebody deciding what is preferable, what a real voting metric is, what makes something good or bad. We can all agree basically that, in debate we tend to agree things that saving lives is a good thing, but we're able to agree on that thing because we're able to make that choice. We're able to determine what we value, whether we value one thing above another thing, what we value in these ways. So in other words, for utilitarianism to make sense, in order for people, one state of the world to be better than another, we must be able to decide what we value, what we believe is a good thing, what we think is an important thing in these ways. So we think that limiting autonomy is a prima facie voter. We think when we better guarantee autonomy, we think when we better allow for people to determine their own states of lives, their own ways in which the rules which govern their lives, we better allow for individual choice to be made, and we think that's an important thing in this debate. But second, if they don't buy that, let's get into how these cities and countryside, or smaller areas, I guess, are structurally different and have different problems which require individual solutions. Let's talk first about healthcare. I think this will be an illustrative example. The reality is that there are different problems in cities and in countryside, and that the creation of a single policy to cover both of them is never going to be effective. Let's look first at, for example, in the developing world, how there are these large slums oftentimes near cities, or large poorer areas, which have specific healthcare needs related to overcrowding, related to disease, and these sorts of things. The reality is rural politicians are unlikely to ever want to fund these things because they view these people as being somewhat better off than themselves, because rural areas have problems of distance between hospitals and accessing hospitals directly rather than problems of wait times and overcrowding. When these different problems exist then, and different knowledge bases are required to fix them, we think that having these separate policies allow for solving these structural issues. This isn't just a question of being right or left on a political scale. This isn't a question of progressivism or not. This is a question of specific problems that require specific solutions, which are better achieved when a localized problem is given. Another example of this would be, for example, the opioid epidemic in the United States, where it's Republicans in major cities, and in suburbs major cities like Justin Amash in Detroit, who are opposing massive funding to the opioid problem because they view it as a problem that's outside of their district. In other words, when politics is national, territorialism happens. People try to pull as much funding as possible into their areas, and as such, problems in outside areas cannot be solved, and expertise is lacking to solve problems in whichever the city in the countryside for a minority of this country. Similarly, let's discuss immigration. The reality is different values exist, sure, but also different problems exist, right? Immigration goes to cities. That fundamentally, immigrants tend to move to cities when they move to a new country. This tends to be where they want to live and where the labor demands are. But immigration tends to be opposed in these countries by groups that are outside of cities. Tends to be opposed by people who live in the countryside who view immigration as a threat to their way of life. The reality is, these two things are not in disagreement with each other. It is very possible for a rural area to limit immigration and not have much of a harm to the world because people don't really want to move there in the first place, and for an urban area to be more open to immigration than they would have been otherwise. We think, again, that allowing for different problems to different solutions, different problems, means that on the whole, people are better off, people are happier, and we have better politics in these countries. Finally, infrastructure. Similarly, the level of acrimony in politics between urban and rural areas often extends to critiquing each other's projects. For example, consider what was referred to as the bridge to nowhere in Alaska, which was actually vital to have a community connected to the real world, right? But when these projects exist and are ridiculed by cities in these urban areas, but that means that these projects never be solved adequately. That a single one-size-fits-all infrastructure plan does not work for cities and countries alike, because it must decide, for example, whether to prioritize connecting people to their jobs or connecting communities to other communities. It must decide, for example, whether to prioritize, finding housing for homeless people, or whether finding housing for people who are being pushed out of cities, people who are being pushed out of cities, whether to prioritize decaying infrastructure. At the end of the day, when national priorities are set, they have to favor one group or the other. When national priorities exist, they choose a policy that one group is going to be unhappy with. By allowing people to make choices over their own lives, when there are fundamentally different problems that exist and different situations that require different solutions, we allow for better policy for both these groups, regardless of political spectrum. Very proud to propose.
I thank to speak for those remarks and the mighty member of the opposition.
Okay, so let's start with some brief refutation to the new extensions we hear out of the MO, and then we'll go into the point of crystallization. So there seem to be three broad extensions coming out of the MO speech. The first is this idea that the national government, that cities are already really represented because they have a lot of say in the national government. We think that this is just patently false. Yes, cities do have a lot of people, and so they do get to vote, but nevertheless, there tend to be more people, at the very least large numbers of people who also aren't in cities. National governments aren't dictated by cities. Like the 2016 election was called in New York for Hillary Clinton after less than 1% of the vote was in. I guarantee no one in New York is voting for Trump. Nevertheless, he's making policy for New York. The fact of the matter is national governments are made up of a broad coalition of both cities and rural areas. And while the member of opposition is correct in pointing out that yes, national governments are failing, the reason why they're failing is because there is a sort of coalition that is unable to create a broadly well-tailored policy that affects both cities and rural areas in a fair way. The MO next tells us that cities have significant economic segregation, and this policy would make it worse by allowing cities to basically jack up prices such that poor people can't live in those cities. I'm sorry, but they were wrong when they first implied this in their POI, and they're wrong when they say it again. We think that cities broadly realize that they need to have a working class. We think that even if cities really want rich people to be in the city, rich people also want things like services to be accessible. They want to be able to do things like go to stores. They want to have people who are working class in those cities, even if there's no other reason than sort of cynical need of the rich to live largely a life of luxury. We think that yes, there is probably some segregation within cities, but just like not everyone in Dubai is a millionaire, just like New York City has a lot of really unaffordable areas, so too does it have affordable areas, because cities know that it would be suicide not to have places be affordable. We think the sort of idea that cities are going to take advantage of this and just drive out all the poor people such that only rich people who aren't part of the working class can live in the city, doesn't really work insofar as those are cities that would not function even for the wealthy that they think cities are entirely run by. And lastly, there's more of this extension of this idea that, like, well, everybody needs the resources, and it's not fair for the cities to afford the resources. Once again, the national government still dictates tax policies. National governments and national programs that require national financing, cities still are taxed by the national government, and this money is still distributed. It's not like, no thank you, it's not like there's any sort of distinction here. With that in mind, let's go into the point of crystallization on why closing government is going to be winning this round. First, on the principle, we think OG is correct to note that there is a rural-urban divide. However, they do fall somewhat into the trap of reductionism. That is, they say city values tend to be good, rural values tend to be bad. Where we meaningfully move beyond our opening is by providing a principled link for why it's important for people, whatever their values, to have meaningful access to representation. We think this sort of access to representation that... No, thank you. We think that access to representation that the MO alludes to by saying, well, you can still vote in national elections, is insufficient representation. Representation isn't just the ability to vote, it's the ability to have your voice being heard. We think that if there's a breakdown such that cities tend to make up a minority of a given country, we think the consequence of that is even if they are voting in national elections, even if they are voting for candidates to represent them, because they won't be able to make a majority, they won't be able to get policies that match their interests. Now, if in a sort of the characterization that the MO gives is correct, and instead like countries are entirely dominated by cities, we think the same problem happens in reverse. That is, if cities make up the entirety of the national government, then likewise rural areas aren't able to have meaningful representation.
On that.
So, actually, sure, I'll take the opening.
Why do we value the utility and autonomy of people living in megacities if their autonomy hurts people living outside of the utility of people living outside of megacities?
So simply put, their autonomy does not hurt people living outside of megacities. More, if we think that the autonomy of people living in rural areas is also going to be better for these people living in rural areas than when they are also bound to the wills of these megacities. But more broadly, on the sort of weighing between like being inconvenienced by policy and having the ability to have self-determination, I think my partner does a very good job of explaining why you should value self-determination, even if it does lead to like policies that tend to be a little bit worse for people. We think that the ability to sort of make decisions about like what sort of policies you want to have is crucial because it is a facilitated way. Our understanding of what policies are good, what policies are bad, what values we care about come fundamentally from this idea that it is important to have a say, to decide what sort of like rules you want to live under, what sort of like policies you want to affect you. We think that when you deny that, when you do not have the sort of autonomy, you don't really have the ability to engage in these other sort of operative rights. We think that freedom is something that people value significantly. It's something that people have fought over. It's something that people have died over during anti-colonial and anti-authoritarian regimes. We think freedom is comparable in value to life. It's certainly far more valuable than the sort of unmechanized, uncharacterized, and unreally weighed, like, general idea of good policy that side opposition wants to hang their hat on. We think that insofar as we've demonstrated that on our side, cities right now are structurally, by the way that political systems are set up, denied the ability to have meaningful representation, and that in countries where that is not the case, it is instead people living in rural areas who are denied the ability to have meaningful representation over their own politics. We think on our side has to have people being better able to make decisions that qualify and provide sort of the values and well-being that they want that is necessary for them. We think we broadly increase autonomy, and sort of on this principle, we are going to be coming ahead of our opening. But secondarily, let's talk about the pragmatics. We think that most cities are probably going to be the progressive cities that is characterized by OG, and I think they do a good job of pointing why cities are, like, on average going to tend to lean liberal. And sure, maybe I was right that, like, there are a couple of conservative cities as well. Delhi's probably not a great example, but nevertheless, like, there probably are some. But where CG elevates this debate and goes beyond the simple, like, cities are progressive and rural areas are conservative paradigm is by providing the mechanization for why it is not simply about policy. It's not simply about politics or ideology that differentiate cities from rural areas. It is instead the very different challenges that cities and rural areas face. Like, yes, people in cities want good healthcare. People in rural areas want good healthcare too. But what good healthcare looks like in each place looks very different. This isn't like liberals want one type of policy and conservatives want other types of policy. This is people in rural areas need more access to things, need to have more funding for things like accessibility to hospitals, while in cities there needs to be much more of an attempt to deal with overcrowding in these sort of overcrowded hospitals that might be very nearby, but you can't really get a seat at, you can't really be involved in very quickly. We think what we demonstrated on our side of the house then, uniquely over our opening, and that beats the sort of like argumentation we get out of opposition about how, like, when cities have their own say, like, other places in the country are going to vote for, like, more conservative policies, is by demonstrating that on our side of the house you're better able to get policies that both help people in rural areas and help people in cities. Like, yes, people in cities are going to be better when they have more say over their policies, so that the national government cannot dictate policies that are harmful for the cities and make cities be subject to that. But likewise, we think rural areas, when they're allowed to have solutions tailored to the concerns of rural regions, rather than needing to make some sort of compromise for the benefits of cities, are also going to have policies that more accurately reflect the special needs that people in rural areas face that are distinct from those that people in cities face. We think that right now, coalition building and governance within sort of national governments requires a compromise that makes neither side happy. So we think, like, overall, in this round, you should be giving the win to the government bench and the one to the CG, because we first uniquely provide the principled underpinning for why it is fundamentally wrong to have this sort of disenfranchisement of people living within cities currently, and second, we provide the pragmatics for why it's not just that, like, some places will become more progressive and some places will become more conservative, but why instead, whatever your sort of ideological lean, you'll have a policy that's better tailored to your needs on our side of the house. For these reasons, happy